it's very interesting why different people become artists or bank managers, or why do we choose this particular thing? In my case, I think it probably started that I was sent away to a boarding school. I think I started painting as a kind of homesickness. Perhaps a lot of art is about some yearning for something one hasn't got. A lot of my life is about going to find very special places and then immersing myself. I camp for weeks and weeks, and then I start to get to know all the different things that are happening. This piece came to be because I'm doing a whole series about swamps and wetlands, and when this idea of doing a huge great mural came up, I thought how wonderful to have a mass of birds with the swamps and wetlands, and the landscape is so huge, and we funny landscape painters do these funny little landscapes about something that's so huge, and then if you've got a great big painting space like this, perhaps one could do something which has got the energy and the excitement of when you're out in the bush. And in this case, I've chosen a place, it's based on the Guido wetlands, which are wonderful wetlands in northern New South Wales. And there you see hundreds and hundreds of breeding birds of different kinds. And in this particular case, one of the great excitements is that there's special, wonderful, exciting kinds of birds. There's egrets. This, what we see here, is going to be, you've got these dark bronze ibises. These are dark, but this is going to be a wonderful white bird, a bit like an angel. I think one wonders why one's obsessed with birds. There's something very mysterious about birds. They can travel vast distances, and they often do travel vast distances to search out particular breeding places, and they're very sensitive to what's happening in terms of climate and weather and food supplies. And so perhaps they're almost a symbol for an environment which is in trouble or not. You know, the most wonderful thing, don't you think, when you hear birds singing, there's something so wonderfully, they are singing the place. It's almost as if the place is all right. But a bird is a sort of 21st symbol of a very special kind. And the ones that I've been particularly drawing, which are going to go on the right-hand side of this painting, a wonderful wader which is called a godwit. A lot of waders have the most curious names, like godwit, or there's another bird called a knot, a K-N-O-T. But the intriguing thing about godwits is that they fly, they breed all up in the tundra, in the northern hemisphere, so Manchuria, all the way up there, and then every year they travel 12,000 kilometers, sometimes non-stop, but more often stopping off, say, in Korea and then one or two other places. And that in itself is such a magic and mysterious thing that they do that. And I suppose it is almost a way of saying these birds do this because the whole world has evolved to have certain kinds of systems that work. And so when you suddenly stop seeing many godwits, like all these beautiful birds, like the different waders, the turnstones and all the others, are getting less and less, when they stop, and you know, I'm going to put a thing which is going to be terribly didactic on the top there. I'm going to have a thing which says something billion godwits, That was in 1950, and then in 1970, half that number, and it could be that in the bottom of this painting I might have 3 little Godwits, because all their breeding places have been built over, where they stop in Korea particularly. And so these are really interesting stories if we're talking about the big things that are happening to the world in a way. Something that really interests me is this disconnect between the way the world actually works and this kind of almost parallel artificial universe that we all live in. And there's a really interesting book I've been reading called Requiem for a Species, which says that the reason why no one's taking any notice of global warming and what's going to happen with El Nino and all the things that are going to happen is that we have this disconnect, and that evolutionary-wise, we always used to understand that something was bad and nasty if it bit us. And in fact, when you read about global warming, it's all cognitive. In other words, it's all in the head. And what this author says is, which I think might be true, is that the reason why we're not facing up to this is we can't bridge that gap. And the intriguing thing is that doing a painting of a whole mass of birds who are perhaps under stress or not is my way of trying to say, hey, these poor creatures, bring it back in, bridge the cognitive and the instinctive. It's a very interesting question, this why one painter paints one thing, or one artist dances another, or writes poetry, or what are the well springs of why we do this thing? Why do we do this completely mad thing? Because we starve half the time. We don't. It'd be much more sensible to go and work for an oil company. For me personally, it comes back to an absolute obsession and love with wild landscape. The exciting thing about art is that you can bring in science and other things, and it's when they meet, really exciting things happen. And so my theory is that if you've got things about global warming and isobars and thermoclines and lots of exciting things happening on the edge, which are sort of rather scientific, obviously rational things, and then they morph into this wild, ecstatic, instinctive, celebratory art stuff, you've got a meeting of the two different kinds of ways we think. And so much of life now is in little boxes. The scientists think they're over there, and the artists are over there. And the most exciting things are when they come together. I think what rather fascinates me is that the disconnect between what's actually happening in the physical world, the natural world, and what's happening in cities, in our metropolitan life, is so big that it's a very exciting idea that one might be able to bridge that gap in some way. We're having a marvellously delicious time here because oil painting is so incredibly sensual. I say that because a lot of the time do watercolor and printmaking. I haven't been done oil painting for some time, and it is so delicious and sexy. And look at the amazingly delicious things that happen when you mix this very poisonous zinc white in. The wonderful thing about paint is that it's quite more allied. I'm almost being when I'm sort of trying to paint one of these gorgeous birds like this thing, I'm almost sort of, there's something physical about it. And I'm going to have tremendous fun getting the relationship between these lovely dark birds and then this white egret. And what's so wonderful about Australia is that you can see the bones of the land and you can lose yourself in the landscape as it really wanted to be. And so I've always found myself obsessed with birds, lizards, and all these different things and as part of the landscape. But increasingly, I'm realizing that what I'm trying to do is that I am a kind of endangered species because I'm painting poor old endangered species. I mean, and so that my obsession and love for landscape has then come full against the fact that a lot of it's closing down. And so that, you see, I'm not a climate denier. I actually know that extraordinary things are happening in the natural world, which are just simply have not been happening in the last many thousands or even million years. And so my fascination is to find why there are fewer breeding events, but then also my excitement is to be able to show people how wonderful these creatures are. Painters, I suppose it's true of a lot of professions, isn't it? Everyone has the successful people, ones who have obsessions. So this is my obsession.